introduce our first speaker, Mr. Ted Hartke. Ted grew up on a hog farm in Chitopolis, Illinois. It's still operated by his family members. His wife of 18.5 years, Dr. Jessica Hartke, have 3 children. A son, Philip, 13, daughter Sophie, 11, and a son, Gabriel Franklin, deceased. Mr. Hartke graduated in 1999 as a civil engineering graduate at SIU Carbondale. 2004, licensed as an Illinois professional land surveyor. 2005, licensed as an Illinois professional engineer. 2011, licensed as a professional design firm. Ted is founder and president of Hartke Engineering and Surveying, Inc. and employs 9 full-time employees. Ted's going to share with us tonight his personal experience of living in a wind farm from 2006 when he bought his home in Morgan County.
Thank you, Ted.
Good evening. Thank you all for showing up tonight to hopefully learn some stuff. And if anyone cannot hear me, just raise your hand or yell, and I'll take care of you. I only brought one handout. It's a double-sided piece of paper like this. I'm sure I ran out. I never thought you'd have this many people. So if someone next to you has one or an extra, share and look at that later. Okay? So I'm going to get started here. I made this presentation for Morgan County, and I think Mike took care of a lot of this introduction for me. Which one of these is laser? The red one? Yep. Anyway, this is the address of my old house, 2121 East 2350 North Road 50 in Illinois. Invenergy constructed wind turbines next to my house during 2012, and they turned them on January of 2013. When they turned them on, we immediately had some issues, and we had a good relationship with the wind company and the construction company, because you remember I was for the project when it came. And they actually, when we had sleep issues, they actually turned off the wind turbines 51 times at night between January through May of 2013. And in April of 2013, we came out and told the public we're having problems with issues with sleeping in our house. And after we came public with the problem, that's when the wind company quit turning off the turbines, so we were able to sleep. So we made it in the house for about 7 more months, and we abandoned our home December the 22nd, 2013. The wind turbines near my house are 1.6 megawatts, and they are 1.6-100, meaning that's 100 meters to the hub height. So the tip of the blade is about 495 feet. We left our home, and we lived in a double-wide trailer for 1.5 years until I could find and afford another house. And so we're no longer living in the double-wide trailer in Collison. So starters here, this is my wife and I and my kids. Christmas 2012. This was about a week before they turned on the wind turbines. So this is my daughter Sophia. Of course, that's me, my wife Jess, and my son Philip. And you know, we're talking about stuff that we learn over time. Well, in the 70s, when you go to a restaurant, smoking and smokers were everywhere throughout the whole restaurant. And it was prevalent, and even advertisements showed that smoking was really cool. Then in the 80s, we started learning some stuff. Smoking was still pretty cool, but then we limited it to a smoking section only because people took offense to smokers and the smell and didn't want to smell terrible when they came home from a restaurant. They wanted to enjoy their food and bring their kids to the restaurant. So in 2008, in Illinois, we passed a law that had entire restaurants smoke-free, and even outside the front door, 15 feet away. You know, this is kind of like a predictor of where we are now with wind turbines. I like a little skeleton. So, this lady is important. this lady's CEO of General Motors. She came and was hired to clean up the mess when they had ignition switch problems. People were hanging a bunch of stuff on their keychains. The keychains were weighing down on the ignition switch. The ignition switch was turning a car off while you're driving because it was failing and sliding backwards, just like you're turning off the car. And people were crashing their cars and they were dying. And GM tried to cover it up for a while, but if you try to cover something up, it comes rearing back pretty hard. So she was hired to clean up the mess, and her thing was that you need to address problems quickly so they don't grow. She says hope is not a strategy. You can't sit here on your butt and do nothing. And she says problems don't go away when you ignore them. They just get bigger. And I hope you can all read the bottom line. Rethink outdated assumptions and expose and correct injustice. Remember the Pledge of Allegiance, the last four words, it says, and justice for all. That's what she's talking about here, justice for all. So, before any wind turbines were built near my home, we had heard this baloney about property value, noise, these things are ugly, it's terrible. And I thought it was a bunch of crap too. And we took our kid to church camp. North of Bloomington is the Methodist church camp there. And my wife and I pulled up to one of these turbines at the end of the driveway, pretty close to the turbine. And we sat there for 20 minutes. And I told her, I remember saying this to her, and I said, see, we have nothing to worry about. So after that 20 minutes, we stood there and looked at turbines going for a short visit on a nice, sunny, breezy day. We all got bored, got in our car, and we drove to church camp. When we were there, we could hear a tractor a mile away. The birds were chirping. I thought it was fine. What I didn't realize was that those turbines were 400 foot tall, and the blade sweep area is about 1 acre. Okay? So then they built turbines next to my house. This structure right there, that's my house. This turbine is 495 feet tall to the tip of that blade. The blade sweep area of that is just over 2 acres, so we're talking double the blade sweep area compared to the ones in Bloomington I thought were cool. And here I'm kind of repeating some information. So in January, February, March, and April, and part of May of 2013, Invenergy had shut these down 51 nights whenever we had sleeping problems, whenever we texted or emailed them. In May, they refused to shut them down. The nearest turbine near my home is 1,665 feet away. The next nearest is 3,147 feet away. I want you to look at that for a minute. The nearest and the third nearest. Here's the turbines I think are slated for you. I think Apex is talking about a 600 or a 650 footer. Can anybody tell me that? What?
6, 7.
Oh my god, alright. These turbines are a total height of 650 feet. The turbine next to my house was 1.6 megawatts, but the Apex proposal is up to 7.58 megawatts. And I had a blade sweep area written here somewhere. Here it is, at the bottom of the thing here I'm comparing my house to what you guys might end up with. So at my abandoned house, the tip height is 497 feet tall. Morgan County proposed 650. The power is 1.6 versus 7 plus or minus. The blade length. I think blade length has a lot to do with sleep issues and bumping. I'll talk about that later. So the blade length of my blade, I call them my turbines. It's kind of sick, but whatever. So the blades next to on my turbines are 164 feet long, and yours are going to be 206. And look at this sweep area. Mine's just about 2 acres, and the proposed ones are going to be over 3 acres here. Okay? So we've gone incrementally quite a bit bigger. We're not talking apples and oranges. The bigger turbine, I think, is going to cause worse problems. So this could be the wind turbine for Morgan County. Now I'm going to go back to my front yard. So that little piece of sidewalk there is around my landscaping at the corner of my house where my bedroom is. This wind turbine in the distance is 2,225 feet away from my house, and the next one in the far distance is 3,454 feet away. And no Photoshop going on here. I have a really nice yard, as you can tell, or I used to. And I looked up when my first official complaint was at January 22nd of 2013. It's 1:22 a.m. People don't complain for fun at 1 o'clock in the morning. And Marlon Connery was the guy that was the project manager for Invenergy. I texted him and I said, turbines are unbearable tonight. We need to talk. I've been awake for 45 minutes praying for a wind direction change or speed change to quiet the machine noise. At the time, we had like a humming, grinding noise in our house, kind of like a diesel engine truck parked in your driveway. And when they turned off these turbines, I'm going to see if I can find a slide later. I'll talk about that later. So I've talked about this at a lot of meetings. Once I was in Rush County, Indiana, and this lady worked for Nextera. And you'll hear this, talk about how great McLean County has with their experience with turbines, and also Benton County, Indiana has a bunch of them. And those are real baby turbines too. And she says that Benton County is having a great experience with wind energy. It works great for them. But she was talking about Benton's 350-foot tall turbines, but at the time in Rush County, she was peddling a 500-footer. She bragged how good Benton County was doing, and when she said that, I had remembered reading about a family with problems in Benton County. I found it. So here in 2011, this person testified that rumble, 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 just like an approaching freight train or a thunderstorm rolling in. That's how one neighbor of a Benton County wind farm describes the noise. Okay, I can tell you that this person is telling the truth. It's a rumbling, heavy bass, subwoofer noise, and it goes and goes. It's very uncomfortable. If any of you have ever stopped at a red light and a teenage kid next to you or behind you pulls up and he's really heavy subwoofing his bass, and as soon as that light turns green and you drive away, you're just relieved and glad to get away from that. That's the same feeling that you have of discomfort, except in a wind farm it does not go away, and at the green light, of course, you can drive away. So this is a nice close-up of my house. I was at another one of these hearings. Someone said that my house is a big, his quote was piece of shit. And I was just looking for money or whatever. Well, my house is not what he said. It was very, very nice. And when people look at houses and they talk about their house, that's just a building, kind of like a church is just a building. It's the people, the congregation of the church that makes a church, right? So in this house, I have my dog Shadow in the garage. That's my son's bedroom. My daughter's bedroom on the east end, upper floor, and then of course my wife and I's room below. Now you're getting an idea about, hey, people live here. This husband and wife picked out that railing, argued about that landscaping, and paint colors and the siding color, and putting a metal roof on this instead of leaving the shingled roof on there. That's all those discussions that you have. We made this our house, okay? And of course the wind turbine is just over the top of the house. That's the one that's 1,665 feet away. This is in our backyard. Same wind turbines to the northeast of us. This playground equipment right here is about 1,600 feet away from the turbine. This is a photo looking out my daughter's bedroom window, and from this window it's about 1,700 feet away. And when they're just a still picture, it's hard to imagine how much of the window it uses up. So I kind of have a thing in here where this turbine rotation takes up the whole window space. So in 2013, in the summertime, a very noisy night. The turbines were thumping and rumbling a lot, and my daughter was up at 11 o'clock. And she's a really sweet, good kid and doesn't get up, and she was up on this night. And she was upset. It was very noisy in her room. This was when Invenergy had stopped turning off turbines. They refused to help us out. And she said, Daddy, I have an idea. And she jumped out of bed, she dug into the toy chest and pulled out these headphones. These are Hello Kitty headphones. She said, will you let me wear these to bed? Of course we said yes. Of course we took the wires and we tied them in a knot so they wouldn't choke her when she's sleeping. And when a wind company says that this is okay to build turbines near your homes, I want you to pull out this photo, and I'll give a copy to whoever's in charge here. Pull out this photo and say, is Apex going to issue headphones for all the children so they can sleep in their bed at night? Now, where I come from, kids wear headphones at things like tractor pulls and demolition derbies, not in their bed at night. I was okay with wind turbines until it came into my daughter's bedroom. This is not fair for this 5-year-old kid. So that was in the summer. This is in the fall. My wife and I kept finding our kids in the living room, on the couch and on the recliner, because they were getting up at night because it's noisy, moving down to the recliner and the couch. And I would get up at night because I wasn't sleeping either. I would go in there and they were in there. And I found that it is quieter in my living room. So that weekend, we broke down all these beds. This is my daughter's bed. This is my son's bed. And this is my wife and I's bed. And we put them all in the living room. People don't do this for fun. And people don't make this up. And for the rest of the year, I would have visitors come, and they would walk into my living room, and they would see all these beds in here, and they would say, what in the hell is going on here? And I'd say, this is the quietest room of our house. Well, what does that mean? It's because of the turbines. They're noisy all night long. And people said, we didn't know it was that bad. You know, we heard you talking about it, we didn't know it was that bad. And this is where wind turbines begin to be hard on your marriage. It's very hard to have a family, and after those kids go to bed at 8:30 or 9, work in that kitchen right there through that doorway and take care of dishes, laundry, adult discussions about what we're going to do the next day for schedules and what bills to pay, and do the normal things that husbands and wives do, and then go to bed next to our children in their beds and have a meaningful, intimate relationship with your wife. If you want to see a really weird house, go find one like this in a wind farm, and there's a lot of them because people have called me. And you find out that the beds are either in the basement or in some interior room of the house, and there are no beds in the bedrooms. And that's a reality for people. This was pretty low when I built these beds in that room. It was a pretty low point in my life. This is probably the lowest. So the night after we moved, let's see here. 2 nights after we moved, it was Christmas morning, and I went to my house to go get my newspaper, and it had snowed. And this is the first time I've ever seen my house from this direction. I've only seen it from the opposite view, where there was always tire tracks or footprints or the dog's tracks or something in the snow. And I tell people that I learned what God created snow for. It was for kids and dogs to destroy. Okay, so I've never seen pristine snow from this way looking in, and I realized when I picked up my newspaper that I was going to never spend another night in my house. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about these distances. I think everybody here knows the more distance you have between you and something bad, the better off that you are. So remember that time I talked about when they turned off wind turbines at night so we could sleep? 49 nights, they either shut off this one, 2,225 feet away, or this one, 1,665 feet away. And that was based on us telling them which one we thought was causing noise. They were doing one or the other, or both, 49 times. There were 2 occasions where they shut both of these off. We still could not sleep. And then they shut off the third next closest. And it was still, we were still awake. Then they shut off this fourth one closest to us. So there was 2 occasions when all the turbines within 3,400 feet were shut off just so we could sleep inside our house in the spring of 2013. So for us, it was all about the noise. I want to talk about the frequency, the magnitude, and the duration. You know, the frequency is the pitch of the noise, high or low, rumbling or screeching noise. We have the magnitude, that's the decibels, that's the loudness or the amplitude or the strength of the noise. And then you have duration. So sometimes you have a noise that lasts only a few seconds and it's okay, but other times you've got that noise, you don't know where it's coming from, you can't fix it. The cricket is in the kitchen, in the pantry. You're laughing, that's good. And if you talk about duration, this is part of the speech where I want to have a volunteer. If I had a person come up here and hold this can of Coke out away from their body, and they sat there and I told you to hold it for a long, 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 long time, are you going to volunteer? Mm-hmm. Awesome. What's your name?
Anthony.
Anthony's going to hold this Coke out far from his body. Hey, you let me know when your arm or back or legs start to hurt, okay?
Okay.
Good luck, Anthony. So, the big questions we come up to this are the 3 big ones. How did it happen to us? Who dropped the ball? And what needs to be done to keep it from happening in Morgan County? So I did a couple comparisons. You have to remember that my township is Pilot Township. The residents per square mile where I live is 9 residents per square mile. The setback distance to the turbine closest to me was 1,665 feet, and the noise level is about 45. In Franklin Township, which I believe will be most impacted by Apex, am I correct about that? Maybe? Mike? Maybe? Okay, so you have a couple townships that are very affected, but I knew Franklin when I wrote this slide last night. So, in Franklin Township, we have 24 residents per square mile. I know this includes a little town, but mine also includes Collison, a little town, okay? Your setback distance is going to be about 1,000 feet, I believe. And your noise level is the IPCB noise limits, which is 45 dBA. So they measured just over 45 at my house, and yours can go up to 48. Okay? Surely you've all seen this one on the internet. This is a GE wind turbine. They talk about how most turbines are situated 400 meters from a home, which is about the sound of a refrigerator. And this has to do with distances because as noise travels away, it gets quieter and quieter, but it kind of levels off over a time. How you doing?
Okay. Thank you.
So there's accusations out there that talk about this. And the only noise reduction option for turbines is limit their size, which you guys I don't think are doing, or impose a greater setback distance. Or both, I'd say. This is especially true in quiet rural environments. Someone told me once that, hey, Hartke, you got tractors, you live in the country, tractors, harvest noise, combines, the Route 49's next to your house, that's lots of traffic, barking dogs, and all the stuff that you have in the country. I was like, well, wait a minute, guys, I don't have any neighbors. They're really far away. There are no barking dogs except for mine. The tractors are 4 trips a year. They plant, they harvest, they fertilize, and they till. That's it. 4 days during the daytime hours usually. They're near my house for about an hour because farming is pretty quick nowadays. And they're only next to my house at a very, very short period when I'm not even home. So that's one of the things. People want to dismiss that noise is a problem, but they don't understand it's all the time. Kind of like you're going to get tired of hearing me. Okay? So I'd like for you all to pull out your charts. It has a color image that looks like this, orange and green, okay?
Now. You said when, so now.
Okay.
Give everybody a moment.
All right, so you lasted like 10 minutes maybe, and it's a little, 4 minutes? Wow, okay. Y'all get A pluses. So this is just a small can of Coke held out from his body. It should not hurt you, but I'm sure you're getting tired and maybe your back doesn't feel awesome, is it?
Well, no, it's mainly in the shoulder, and there's a reaction in the hand with a lot of the cold that cause, like, there's heat
Okay.
from the body, and that's a reaction. There are a lot of forces, and probably
Okay.
lactic acid that's not.
I'm not about to call him a big wimp or nothing, but we all know of people who have carpal, well, maybe you know of people who's had carpal tunnel disease or problems from typing or having bad posture. Hey, you can go sit down if you like.
Very well.
And that's just to show that the duration of something that's uncomfortable gets worse and worse. It's a dose response. Kind of like how much lead would you like to be exposed to, or secondhand smoke or asbestos. We want to stay away from it. So anyway, here the Stephen Ambrose, he made your chart, by the way. He wants to talk about how widespread complaints begin at 35 dBA of noise. So he wants the design goal to be no louder than 32. Here, of course, is the chart. Every one of these black dots is a US EPA noise study. And they measured community responses compared to what the measured noise levels were for all of these offenses. These were done in the 1970s. I think they published it in 1974. This is lowest observed adverse effect level at 40 dBA. That is when adverse health effects begin. And at 33.5 dBA, that's where the widespread complaints begin. So you can start complaining typically before it actually starts impacting your health. Okay? So remember, your IPCP noise limit's about 48, and that puts it way up here near the 50 mark. The turbine noise measured at my house is about 45, and that's past where adverse health problems start, and you're starting to get to the place where you're at strong appeals to stop noise. This means that people are going to file lawsuits and look for the culprit who caused all these problems for their home. I call this the poop chart. These are poop emojis I found last night. They're cute. I looked up LincolnLandWind.com last night, and this is the Apex's Lincoln Land Wind website for the project in this county. Check out some of the cool stuff they say. This is a big advertisement. Oh, by the way, their website is all of this stuff except for the poop marks, okay? So the sound of the wind turbine blades passing through air is often described as a whoosh. Measurements show the sound is no louder than a kitchen refrigerator air conditioning unit at 1,000 feet. Scientific evidence confirms this sound is not dangerous and any low frequency not harmful. And I also say low level frequency noise and infrasound. Infrasound is a made up word from acoustaticians who speak out against wind companies. So wind companies have finally started using our language for their problem. Emitted by wind turbines is minimal and no consequence. Well, that's all crap. This is Dr. Paul Schomer's slide from Boone County, Illinois in 2015. This Paul Schomer lives in Champaign, Illinois. He is a PhD and a professional engineer. In 1968, he was a graduate student, and he was a graduate student. He assisted in writing the current Illinois Pollution Control Board standard noise limits for all the octave bands. This is the guy who wrote our code, and this is what he has to say about the poop emoji slide, okay? Here's the wind turbine effects: annoyance, health, sleep, from audible sound, infrasound, and a combination of the two. And the IPCB noise limits only responds to the first bullet, annoyance. health effects caused by the infrasound are not addressed by IPCB. Now he wants to talk about A weighting is trying to use to assess most noise. The wind turbine industry, remember that chart with the turbine and the picture of the refrigerator at 40 dBA? The wind industry has alleged that the A weighting should be used to assess turbine noise, but A weighting cuts out the high and low frequencies. I think I'm going to gloss over some of these. These are all about repeats of problems you have. Who's going to be affected? Okay. One of the big things against me is that people say that I have neighbors who are perfectly fine, and that's true. They have different orientation from the turbines. Some of them are much further away. And people are different. You can have two guys walk through a hayfield, and one guy's grasping for air because he's all choked up from his reaction to hay fever. The other guy looks at him and says, "Hey, you're a big wimp. I'm fine. You're a big wimp." Well, he has a problem. This turbine noise is the same deal. I think it all has to do with our physiology, how our ears are made or whatever. But it's true, about 15 to 25% of us have this tendency to be having dizziness or seasickness or vertigo, and it just happens to some of us. So it's a Russian roulette type of thing. You don't know it's going to affect you until, I guess, you have a turbine for a neighbor. So Dr. Schomer has been in a lot of places and looked this up. To speed this along, I'm going to skip some of this stuff. So the wind industry has made some allegations about several things. And they want to say that A weighting is appropriate for turbine noise, and that's wrong. They want to allege that a wind turbine is quieter than a refrigerator, and that's wrong, and here's why. An A-weighted level from a wind farm may be lower than the level for a refrigerator, but it's not quieter. Although the level is lower, it's not quieter. It has to do with the frequencies. Wind farms also say what you can't hear, it can't hurt you. That's wrong, because X-rays, infrared, ultrasounds, and infrasound, they can all hurt us, but we can't see them. We don't hear them, but they're still affecting us. They're still making us wake up. And then there's a guy in Australia, Mr. Cooper, and he did a study that proved that. They want to talk about how all of these problems are nocebo. That means you just heard about it or read about it on the internet, or Hartke came and did a speech and he's a liar. And they say those things, but these things have been happening a long time. The people who are having effects include infants and small children who cannot read. They've never been to a Ted Hartke show. And even a deaf person in the Cooper study was also a very good candidate who accurately predicted when turbines were running and when they were not running, even at night when she could not even see the turbines. They talk about people hear the sound and it makes themselves angry. Most of the people in Shirley, Wisconsin couldn't hear the turbines, but they were woken up. And they talk about blaming the internet, and 40 years ago there was no internet to blame when NASA did their noise study. I'm going to blast through some more of these in the sake of time, because all you guys want to go home eventually. So on the 7 allegations that wind companies make, they're all shown to be wrong. So the point is that people need to evaluate what's being said. They're quieter than a refrigerator, not true. A weighting is okay, that's not true. If you can't hear it, low frequencies, and the thousands of people around the world that are having these problems, 100% are imagining it, that's not true. There's a couple recommendations that Dr. Schomer has. He thinks that if you keep the noise below 39 dBA, which is underneath the health impact level, which is on your colored chart, he thinks that's a good idea. And All those blue slides I showed you was from Boone County in 2013. This is from Livingston County, Illinois in July of 2016. Dr. Schomer took an actual real wind turbine layout for an Invenergy project. Those are 500-foot tall turbines, and I think they're 1.7 megawatt. And he did a sound analysis prediction research project here. And he, for every 100 or so feet for setbacks, he gave an updated chart of how many homes would be affected. And when he finally got to 3,250 feet, 2 of the 220 residences remained in danger zone, and there was 218 protected. This 3,250 foot number that Dr. Schomer gave during this slideshow at that timestamp that you can watch on YouTube, it's really boring. You can watch the whole thing to help fall asleep at night. And this is what the Livingston County Board used to establish their setback for turbines in their newest ordinance, just recently passed. So, a couple more things about my house. This is a project application for noise levels from June of 2011, when the wind farm next to my house was approved. And HDR Engineering prepared it. It says the loudest predicted turbine was going to be at 45 dBA, and they were right. At my house, it was about 45 dBA. And that's comparable to a refrigerator with a closed door. These guys repeat the same stuff a million times. I think they repeat it enough times so you can start believing it. And then it says here, the character of sound produces broadband and absent of tones is impulsive or thumping qualities. That's not true, because we had a lot of thumping, rumbling noise in our house. And the next one's really important. So on the previous one, they said that the loudest predicted is at 45. Next screen. The majority of locations would experience turbine sound levels of less than 40. This level is sufficiently low to minimize or eliminate any potential for sleep interference. So here you have an application that said, hey, you're going to have some 45s. And by the way, at 40, that's when you're actually safe. So it's right there in black and white. I can't believe this keeps happening to people, okay? So I think your county should put in 39 maximum noise limit. So we complained a lot. We went to county board meetings over and over every month for probably 2 years. They finally did a noise study at my house. Look at the cool people they hired to do it with. Michael Hankard of Hankard Environmental. When he showed up in my backyard, I talked to him and he said, I don't envy you one bit. Dr. Schomer, he's the guy from Champaign. He's the guy that helped write the code in 1968 or so. When we tried to hire him, because he was really good and really close, because acquisitions are few and far between, he said, I'm under contract doing research for Invenergy. Invenergy had already gobbled up the local guy and kind of had a little regulatory capture, if you want to call it that. Okay? So, Mr. Blazer, Mike Blazer, he came to a meeting after I think the second wind turbine had blades broken off, and he said that blades are designed to fall straight down, and that was pretty funny. And then we keep reminding everyone that Mr. Mike Blazer, who is now Vice President of Invenergy, told my county board that blades are designed to fall straight down. It's just crazy. Here's where they, this is from the acoustician showing where my house was. Oh, I forgot to talk about Dave Miles and his wife Jean. Dave and Jean live in this house here, and this is my house. After they quit turning off turbines, Dave and Jean couldn't sleep in their house because the whole time we had been protecting them, because the same turbines that bother them was bothering us. So they showed up late in the game and people called them liars because they had never complained before. And that really pissed off Dave Miles a lot when they called him a liar. He's a pretty honest guy. It reminds me a lot about several people here seem to be pretty honest. So Apex, they love to have people tour wind farms. You gotta watch out for what day you visit an Apex wind farm, what time it was when you were near the turbines. Because during the sound study at my house, they started in August. And it went August, September. And at October 8th, on my birthday, they came to my county board ready to tell us the results of the sound study. A woman named Kim Schertz from north of Bloomington, during her public comments, she said the wind company has cheated on their noise study, and they did it in August and September, and that is during the time that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service endangered species curtailment order was in effect. When they were doing the sound study, my wife and I said that the wind company was cheating and not running the turbines as loud or as fast as what we had experienced before. And they were calling us, that's not true, and there's no correlation between the acousticians and the wind company. They're pretty independent. That's why we hired these independent guys. Well, right there it is. They did it during August and September when they're under curtailment order. So as soon as Kim told that bombshell, the wind attorney, Mike Blazer, said, hey, we just haven't had very much wind in August and September. We're going to extend the survey, the noise study, for 2 more months. And they continued through October and November. Okay? So we caught him. It was good. So if you go visit a wind farm during August and September, you're not going to hear it. It's not going to be as loud as it usually is, because around our area, we have this bird and bat curtailment order. Oh, that's because of bat migration or something to do with wildlife. They talk about when the worst noise is at nighttime, because during the daytime there's always ground wind noise, but at nighttime the ground is very stable. And if you go in the evening or nighttime and look around in the trees around you, there's no wind at the ground, but the tops of the trees the leaves are blowing a little bit, and the branches are kind of swaying at the very tops of trees. Well, that's what he's talking about here, where the noise is worst on the ground when the only noise available is only coming from the wind turbine. So I've been picking on Apex because I know you guys are dealing with Apex here. This is a Apex Clean Energy Good Neighbor Agreement, talking about giving $500 as a signing bonus, and they get $1,000 every year if a turbine is built within 1/2 mile of the house located on your ground. So this is a good neighbor agreement, $1,000 a year if we're within 1/2 mile of you. Okay? The good neighbor agreement's terrible. You sign off on all your rights for noise, flicker, vibration, well problems, whatever they can come up with, health issues, they're all in there. And I want to point out something here. I think this is where I zoomed in, where it said if the wind turbine is placed within 1/2 mile of your house. So if Apex has good neighbor agreements and protects themselves within 1/2 mile of their turbine from the neighbor, think about it, they're protecting themselves from a neighbor's lawsuit. Don't you think that'd be a great distance to start with, to have the neighbor protected from the wind turbine? Would be a great 1/2 mile setback. And if you have a 1/2 mile between you and the turbine, and you want to build your house, another 200 feet over closer to the property line, because your house is kind of not centered on your property now, and you want to build that retirement home, don't you think it should be from all of your land? Because you own all of your land, and they don't own any of it, unless you sign up a good neighbor agreement. So I think this is like an Apex self-imposed 1/2 mile setback. So here's the cool thing about Apex. They are actually a pretty good company, because in Vermilion County there were 3 homes where the homeowners did not sign a good neighbor agreement. This is near Rossville and Hoopston area, which is in Vermilion County where I used to live. And in this instance, Apex Clean Energy purchased Michael Roebling and Deborah Roebling's home for $100,000 before a turbine was built. Okay? Here's another property. Apex paid IREX for about 5 acres of land. There's a tax stamp. If you guys know what tax stamps are, you take the dollar amount times 1,000, and that's the dollar amount for the sale price. That's $295,000 sale price. And your real estate transfer tax is always 1%. Okay? So, if you think about this, if there's nothing wrong with Apex Wind Turbines, then why would Apex purchase these homes? I just showed you 2 deeds, and there's a third one I've never bothered to get, but there's 3 of them. Okay? Does that make you think for a minute? Within a half mile, and they're buying your home before they build a turbine. So, remember the house they bought for $295,000? Here's a real estate listing. Right here. Same address. It says on the real estate listing, full disclosure. Also, this property is part of a good neighbor agreement with Hoops and Wind, and they'll give the owner $2,500 a year for taxes. So they're going to give you $2,500 a year to buy this house, and check out how much it sold for, $117,000. So they took a house that they bought for $295,000, sold it for $117,000. Same house, and this is only a few months later. This date is May of 14, and this date was May of 2015. Right there it is. 1 year's time period it dropped that much. So this is what it comes out to be. On 5/27 it's $295,000. They listed it for sale. Big giant discount. The listing was removed and then they sold it. So it went down about 60%. Okay? Here's where you should have a property value guarantee in your ordinance. Okay? In my house, when people told me, Hartke, your house is not going to be worth squat after they build turbines, I stupidly said this. I said, I don't care. Hopefully my taxes will go down because my house went half price. But I don't care because I'm never leaving. I'm not leaving my house. Well, I'm not even interested in selling it. I'm staying there for good. And then 2 years later, I lost my $100,000 on my house. So let's talk about Apex. I don't know if there's any landowners here who have signed a contract with Apex. I'm telling you, this is coming. So when you sign your lease of your land, you allow them to do all kinds of stuff. They're allowed to use your land as collateral and as a mortgage and things. And if you don't believe me, look it up. I'm sure it's in there. And when they did not pay the steel fabricators and Resitech, I'm not sure what that company is, they had mechanic liens perfected at the courthouse and got a judgment. And these are the mechanic liens: 1.4 million, 500,000, and 170,000. That's almost $2 million. And this mechanics lien affected these properties. And these are the names of all the farmers listed on the liens for the non-payment of the construction of wind turbines. Okay? The people on this list had previously used their land for mortgages, for, what do you call it when you go to get like an operating loan? You get seed and fertilizer, and you get a, what? Line of credit or an operating loan. Is it kind of the same thing, I suppose? These people went to go to the line of credit, and the bank said, whoa, you're going to pay a little more interest because you got some pretty hefty liens on your property. So they had the ramifications, they had some of them with inability to secure operating loans, they had issues with mortgages and estate planning, and they had issues with interest rates when negotiating loans or liens for land transactions and the lender moving the farmer into higher risk categories because they didn't have their land free and clear because these stupid liens that had been filed by the construction companies. I don't know what this is worth. I'm kind of like the guy that doesn't want to owe anybody money, and I keep all my credit cards paid off, and I don't have any automobiles payments, and I don't have any of that stuff. And I would be really mad if I had something free and clear and all of a sudden it's encumbered. So I'm going to talk about this. That looks like ingenious. That's ingenious. This is the UI Assembly Hall. It's amazing. And that's something that's clever or original and inventive. That's what ingenious is. And this is a picture my daughter drew when she was 7 years old after we left our house. And wind companies have told me that I coached her on this, but I didn't. This is, she calls this the Ghostbusters. She got this from Ghostbusters, okay? And I like it. It looks like she's flipping the bird with the turbine blades. It's kind of funny. And she also included this little tiny door on the bottom. Pretty accurate. And she wrote this. By Sophia Ruth Hartke. You may think wind turbines are good, but when you have 50 by your home, you can't sleep in your own room, and you try to sleep, but you just can't because of the wind turbine engine noise. I had to move into a mobile home because my mom, dad, and brother, plus me, couldn't sleep. And to a 7-year-old girl, that's engine noise, not ingenious. Okay? Engine noise. So, for you guys, you find out how far away the nearest turbine near you is safe, that protects your health. Some acousticians that say it's 1.25 miles. You need to find out what the safe distance has been promoted by doctors in the most recent wind farms, because they're huge nowadays compared to little baby turbines like in Bloomington, Illinois. And here's the big thing here. Your elected official's only job is to protect health and welfare of citizens. It's not a elected official's job to help make farmers money. It's not the elected official's job to make energy companies profitable. That's not their job. Their only job is to protect your health and safety and welfare. So, remember I showed you earlier there's a distance of 3,400 or so feet from the turbine that's before the closest turbine to my house. This is about a 600-foot tall turbine, and this is the launch distance level from level ground here to this point right here. And that launch distance is about 3,278 feet. That's kind of has to do with health, safety, welfare. I'm going to keep going here. Here's a letter from my school superintendent. And he writes about students in the school. He said, I was not fully aware of the impact that wind turbines have on my school districts. It's never a good thing when children have health issues or families have to leave their homes to get away from turbines. He was talking about my kids. The revenue generated by turbines is a blessing to our school, but the unintended consequences are real. I hope when ordinances are discussed in the future, these issues are considered. Bill Mulvaney, Superintendent Armstrong School. A lot of people have asked me, Ted, is there someone that's independent from you that verified that you have a problem and there's kids with problems? I said, yeah, this guy right here. So you saw my kids when they were little at the beginning of the slideshow. This is what they looked like a year ago when I made this slide the first time. And, we should have verified things before welcoming turbines. Some of the things I've learned, insulating your house won't work. There's a lot of people that have left their homes. You just don't hear about it because they get bought out or they make a agreement with the wind company. They get settled. When we lived in Collison, in the double wide, it was 1.25 miles from the nearest turbine. I moved 8 miles, but I was still kind of near turbines. About weekly, we still had some sleep disturbances, even though we're 1.25 miles away from turbines, and it was only intermittent, and it went away quickly. I'm not saying that we had this huge problem, but if I always only lived a mile and a quarter away, I would not have been able to recognize what was waking me up at night, because the feeling is something you won't forget. Perhaps all wind companies could learn from Apex and buy out the homes. That's good. And, going from when my daughter was 5 and now she's 11, we've been fighting this a long time. And I've been sharing my story. I'm trying to get the most good out of my house. My house might be ruined, but it's not wasted because I'm trying to get other homes saved from having to be abandoned like mine. Here's my son. He started out 8 years old. Now he's going on 20. He's president of his freshman class. And He has a really nice girl for a homecoming date. It's pretty amazing. He's actually 14. And, you know, when the turbines came, I was totally fine with it, 100%. I was 100% in favor of it. I was fine with it. And I'm so fine with any of your neighbors doing whatever they want on their land. If they want to plaster hubcaps all over their house, like the hubcap house was in Bloomington, if everybody ever heard of that, or Peoria, wherever it's at, or paint it pink, or put a giant crane elevator, or I think I'd go for even a strip club. That's on their own land. It's theirs. They own all of it, all the way up to the property line. But the problem was that when those activities, the noise or the strip club or whatever happened, those activities came into the sacred private places within my daughter's bedroom, which was here, my son's bedroom, which was here. I'm going to tell you the creepy guy story real quick. Let's say you're at a party. This is totally relevant for the Supreme Court stuff going on right now. So you're at a party, and this creepy guy you don't know comes up and taps your wife on her backside here, maybe, let's say, and taps her. And it doesn't bother her, because your wife's pretty tough. And it bothers the husband, though. He's like, damn, dude, what are you doing? And the guy's like, hey, man, cool, man. I'm not hurting her. Are you hurt? And she's kind of shrugging. No, I'm not hurt. Okay, that's fine. He keeps doing it. It keeps bothering the wife. And that's really bothering the husband. And it keeps happening more and more. Pretty soon the husband's just ready to knock this guy out on his butt. Because you're touching his wife. You're not hurting her. But that's not allowed. That's like what this is here. In our case, the kids aren't allowed to sleep in their bed. Maybe we're not hurting those kids, but in their bedrooms, in my house that I paid the mortgage and the taxes and the utilities, a creepy guy is putting his hands under the covers and tapping my children awake, rubbing them awake, shaking them awake, waking them up with his noise or his thumping, rumbling noise. Okay? That's where you cross the property line. So, I lost my camera here. I have no problem with what you did on your land, because you own all of it, but I do too. I'm going to kind of skip through some of this stuff here. Dr. Schomer, he recommends that if you design a noise level for 34 dB, 90% of the noise will be and stay below 39 decibels. He thinks that's a good idea. I'll talk about moratorium a little bit. If you guys need to slow this down a little bit and make sure your county board goes into this with both feet and full awareness. Slow it down and get educated yourselves so you understand the problem, and apply some rules to just make sure everyone's rights are protected. If you want to sign a good neighbor agreement with the wind company and take a roll of dice or Russian roulette, whatever you're doing, that's your business. But you need to make it so that your local officials are not giving away your rights to be able to negotiate that arrangement. You all should be able to decide for yourselves and not have a middleman just give it away because he thinks his turbines are cool and he toured a wind farm on a quiet day. Okay? So you need to slow down. These wind companies, if it's viable and this is really real and wind energy is amazing and they can make money, Apex will build wind turbines here regardless of a suspension or a moratorium. If you guys give them rules and they can abide by them and it still works, they will still build it here. And that's for them to decide as a business decision whether or not they want to build it under parameters that are fair. Apex, I think they're terrible. They were wanting to do this in Crab Orchard, Tennessee. They were going to take a mountaintop and level off the top and build wind turbines. Now, to me, this is not the environmental thing to do, is chop off top of a mountaintop and screw this up right here. I have a few requests. If the wind company gets approved here, your officials, or you, should have them sign the document. Does it protect children in their homes? That's important. Will the wind company sign a contract which states that children will not be awakened in their beds, in their bedrooms at night? If the wind company wakes children, will they purchase the home of the family so they can escape? If the wind company won't sign that, then there's a problem with their wind turbines. Your ordinance should err on the side of caution, use scientifically based noise limits, and those can be defended in court. If you think the wind company is just going to sue you, none of the wind companies have been successful suing a county or a township for putting in noise restrictions. None of them. Let's see here. If you have safe setbacks and you have waivers allowable where the neighbor can waive any setback, noise or distance, whatever it wants, I think that's good because it releases your county board members personally and your county as a whole. It releases them from being in the middle and being sued by either a resident or by the wind company. It cuts them out of the deal. If they allow waivers and they put in a safe enough setback, I think that's the way to go. I think I want to talk about decommissioning for 1 second. Typically, I think the decommissioning and bonds and insurance to remove a turbine is in the magnitude of $500,000 per turbine from research I've seen. However, Pattern Energy in Ford County said that the per turbine removal is about $700,000. And you could go either way. You can have your county fully protected and get the full decommissioning amount in place that's going to be enough to tear down the turbine with the company giving you a bond or what escrow account, whatever it is. Or you can say no decommissioning. All of the teardown of the turbine is a responsibility of the landowner. That will cause the landowner to not be dependent on the taxpayer to bail them out at the end if this goes badly. So then if the landowner has to deal with it himself, that person and family or whoever owns the farm ground, they're going to be much more cautious and careful because it's their skin on their own back that has to take care of the problem. If you guys have a pathetic decommissioning price in there, $50,000, $200,000, whatever it is, it's pathetic. At the end, you will be their final bailout. They're going to make taxes off of you from the beginning, throughout the production of the energy, through the middle, and at the end when they walk away and they're bankrupt and they just let you have a turbine, you will bail them out the last time. That's all of my stuff. How long was that?
Hour and 20 minutes.
Oh my God.
A little less.
Hey, I'm an open book. We can wait for questions at the very end. I do not care what the question is. We can talk about anything personal you want. In front of everybody, if you're too scared to ask a question, write it down on a card, sneak it to somebody that's working on the edges, send it up here so no one's embarrassed to ask a question in front of a neighbor that is going to belittle them or whatever. And I'd be glad to help you however I can.
Thanks again, Ted. Hey, can I have the clicker there? All right, folks, I know it's been a while already. I think what I have to say is worth your time. I understand if you need to get up, go to the bathroom, grab another beer. I see a few folks with those. Make yourself at home, but I would like to move forward with this. Ted's talked about one of the worst case examples of wind energy zoning that's ineffective. He would admit that not everybody experiences this. This is not common with everyone, and we know that's true. But it's happening to a fair number of people, and Ted is not alone. I think, in my experience as a former planning commissioner and somebody who's lectured on equitable wind energy zoning from Michigan to Kentucky, Missouri, North Dakota, I'm going to Montana, I've seen these stories and see these things played out all across the Midwest. And I think there's a fundamental injustice in how the wind industry wants to have the land use policy assembled. And I think if you listen to some of the things I have to suggest, you'll see that in fact what I'm offering is a serious upgrade to a 10-year-old ordinance here in your county. It needs to be improved. The ordinance that's in place here today is one that I've seen all across the Midwest. It was a very common approach everywhere, because all these projects started when the renewable portfolio standards were put into law in 2007 and 8 in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, etc. And that's when the whole wind rush, if you will, took off. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So briefly, I'm the former vice chairman of the Riga Township Planning Commission. That's in southeast Michigan. We're about 20 minutes from Toledo, Ohio. We formed a nonprofit in 2010 because wind development was proposed in our community. It's called the Interstate Informed Citizens Coalition. My partner in that is a Democrat. I'm a Republican. I'm also a senior policy fellow at E&E Legal in Washington, D.C. That is unpaid. I get no money from any of these activities. Apex in particular is good at telling people like they are in Isabella County that I'm a front for the fossil fuel industry. It's just a lie. And I don't know how you prove that. They could run around and say that you beat your wife, and how would you prove that you don't beat your wife? All I can say is if you really believe I'm funded by any sort of industry sources, call me up, come to my house, and I'll pull out my tax forms and show you. It's just not true. Why am I able to do this? My wife has a great job, and she puts up with this. I don't walleye fish, I don't drink, and I don't chew tobacco, so I get to talk about renewable energy stuff. So I've covered all that. This is the project footprint. I think you've had a chance to see this on the map. It's based on our best approximations of what information we've been able to glean. So, as we've already heard discussed, your current wind ordinance uses the noise standards from the Illinois Pollution Control Board. It has a 1,000-foot setback to a home, not a property line, 1.1 times the height to property lines, 550 height limit, and a decommissioning protection. The value was established by an engineer. There's other things that need to be in there. I mean, we could sit here for 6 hours and talk about all the things you may want to regulate in a wind ordinance. I'm going to try and hit the high points. I helped draft the wind energy ordinance that became a state model in Michigan. I have a degree from the University of Michigan. I fully expect us to beat Illinois on the football field. Let me see. So I've done a number of things. Very proud of the fact that our ordinance in Riga was placed on that list. Here, RigaTownship.com, R-I-G-A Township.com. If you go to that site, you will find a copy of our ordinance there. And you can dig into the details of how we regulated wind in our township when 2 developers had a project proposed. I think it's worth your time to look at it if you can convince your county that it's time to adopt a moratorium and to take a serious look at updating your, what I think is an obsolete ordinance. So then I don't have to go into all the details of what's in there and why. And boilerplate, I'm not a lawyer, but I do watch Law and Order. I'm not offering you legal advice, and it's important to have good municipal attorneys assisting you if you're going to update your ordinance. Finally, also I need to say, the wind industry wants to make this deliberation in your community about everything but health, safety, and welfare. They want to have us discussing about how noble, green, and beneficial wind energy development is and how much money will flow into the community. That's what they want you to focus upon at all times. But truthfully, the only issue before us as a community is how to safely place 50, 60, or 70-story tall noisy structures into a fairly quiet rural residential environment. Now, whether these structures produce green electricity, extract oil or coal, or turn sow's ears into silk purses is absolutely irrelevant. This is about separating conflicting uses of land and protecting health, safety, and welfare. Nothing more, nothing less. And to your commissioners, I understand what it's like to be on that side of the table. You have leaseholders making certain demands, you have neighbors making certain demands, and I think Ted's approach is something that I should articulate more fully in here, but if you have a 2-stage arrangement in your ordinance, very big setbacks to unleased property lines, very small setbacks to leased property homes, very high noise limits for the leaseholder's home, very low noise limits to unleased property lines, you now have the best of both worlds, and if the wind company wants to build, they now have to go to all the unleased landowners and negotiate a proper easement, one at a time, so that all your full negotiating rights are restored. Because what you have right now, and I'll talk about this some more, is a standard wind ordinance that donates uncompensated nuisance and safety easements across unleased private property, not even to your neighbor farmer, who may very well be your friend, but your neighboring farmer's tenant, just the person that rents their ground. And by the way, Apex makes it clear, at least in Michigan, that they're not going to be here very long, that they have a policy of selling just before the project's built or just after it's constructed. They do not maintain and own these projects, and it's also my understanding that Apex is looking for a buyer for the whole company. which is important. And it's an important thing as a zoning person. A wind company will tell you, well, we're not going to do these kinds of things, so you don't have to worry about that in your ordinance. But your ordinance will apply to any wind company that shows up until you modify your ordinance again. So you're not writing a wind ordinance for Apex's development, you're writing an ordinance for all comers. So if we use consent and compensation, we transfer the blame and responsibility away from your commissioners and put it back into the private landowners to negotiate an easement to decide whether or not they want to be a wind turbine neighbor. That's fair. So, I'd like to just talk about zoning things, but because wind companies push this into everything but land use issues, I need to address some of their macroeconomic things and some of the social things they talk about. So let's back up a little bit and take a view from 30,000 feet at wind development. So my talk mainly is based in Michigan because I spend a lot of time there, but this is a National Renewable Energy Lab wind map at 80 meters. So you can see great wind is in places like Iowa, 8.5 meters per second. Michigan's best wind is Iowa's worst. It has a practical implication. Every turbine that gets constructed in Michigan would produce roughly twice as much electricity if you just simply build it in Iowa. So it's a bad deployment of capital into a poor wind resource. But Illinois has a very substantial renewable portfolio standard that basically compels this generation to be produced in state, which is no good for ratepayers. Secondly, well, let me get to it. I'm getting ahead of myself. You look at Iowa, it's not much better. You can see the best wind is up here. Hartke's house is up here, and I would say they should go back and put them where Hartke's house is because there's great wind. I'm kidding. But take a look down here where we are. That's some very poor wind. Very poor by Illinois standards, let alone Iowa standards. And if you zoom in and you look at these colors, you see, why is anybody here at all? It's a very expensive wind resource. And we see this in power purchase contracts. Here's the western prices, Iowa, Oklahoma, places like that. Here's Michigan. It's hard to get published wind contracts. I'm sorry, my hand shakes. It always does. But you can see the trend line for Michigan's wind contracts. The latest project in Michigan in Gratiot County, Apex is actually trying to build just north of there an even worse wind resource right now. But that last project in Gratiot County, Michigan came in at $60. Detroit Edison owns it. It's one of the most expensive wind contracts signed in the United States in 2016. So wind resource has an effect on your economics and on your pocketbooks. And we see this in the published numbers. Michigan ratepayers are paying $50 to $60 per megawatt hour, which is 5 or 6 cents per kilowatt hour. Yet Apex offered wind from Oklahoma into Missouri at only $21. And some are as low as 17. So what about CO2? Younger folks in particular are often concerned about global warming. And the attitude is, well, we would pay any amount because we have to get off fossil fuels, we have to save the planet, we have to reduce CO2, right? Well, okay, let's take a look at that. All the harm that's alleged to be produced by CO2 emissions, some of the people in my organization think it's a very real harm, some of us just don't know, so we try and stay agnostic on it. But the Obama administration calculated that all the harm from coastal flooding and climate change and crop damage, that if you put a dollar amount on that, that's $40 per ton of CO2 emitted, which is a pretty high number actually. So if you want to reduce CO2, so the argument is we want to reduce CO2 emissions to save us $40 per ton in damages to our climate and our planet. Well, MISO, which is our regional grid operator, I don't know if you guys are MISO or PJM here, do you know? MISO. They did an analysis of the Obama Clean Power Plan, and look how much it costs to reduce CO2 emissions with wind development. $237 a ton. 6 times the economic harm of reducing that $40 a ton of harm from CO2 emissions by trying to reduce it with wind. Curiously, the United States has reduced CO2 emissions a lot relative to many European countries. And it's not because of renewables, it's because of fracking. And because we've gone from coal-fired generation to gas, our CO2 emissions have actually dropped a whole bunch. Whereas you look at Germany, where they're closing nuclear and replacing it with wind and solar, their emissions are actually flat or increasing because they're switching to more coal. So I'm going to breeze through this part because you have a lot of wind turbines in Illinois, but we have about 1,500 megawatts of wind development, but we've had a lot of social and political disruption. And the windiest region, the tip of our thumb, if you understand our great state, I mean, we get to carry a map around with us. I mean, how cool is that? The tip of the thumb, as we call it, is where the best wind has been historically. And all the green stars are where there's operating wind turbines in Huron County. They have about 500 turbines spinning in that county. I think Benton County is the only other county this side of the Mississippi with a number approaching that. It may be a little higher. But even with nearly 500 on the ground, they were going to try several more townships worth of development. NextEra and Detroit Edison wanted to build in Lincoln, Sand Beach, and Sherman. Now, the wind developers would have you to believe that, look, it's just the thought of change that scares you about wind development, and once they're constructed, you make your peace with it, and it's not a big deal. Okay, Huron County has had 500 turbines, and they started being built in 2007, so they certainly have a lot of experience with them. So, 3 more projects getting ready to go in 2015, 2016. Lincoln Township is a particularly interesting case here. 4 out of 5 of their township trustees had Detroit Edison wind leases. They stood to profit handsomely from wind development. Usually that means a project's going to get approved. In Michigan, whenever there's a turbine project that got built, it's because there was conflict of interest among the policymakers. Isabella County in Michigan, for instance, where Apex is trying to build, they've leased several county commissioners, I think road commissioners, planning commissioners, township officials. The most prominent county commissioner they've leased is Frank Engler. Some of you may know his more famous first cousin, former Governor John Engler. My opinion is they harvest the officials so they can harvest the wind. So, nonetheless, these guys were going to get the big checks with turbines in Lincoln Township, but they said, you know what, we don't want it. They were under county zoning. They didn't have township zoning yet. They sent a letter that said, we feel that Huron County has done our part as far as green energy. We feel that no additional turbines should be allowed in Huron County, even though they were going to get the big checks. Well, there's a lot of details here, but the bottom line, these last 2 projects created a couple county-wide and a couple township-wide zoning referenda that I don't think you have that right here in Illinois, but we do. So we get to vote on these things whenever there's an ordinance amendment if we want to. Well, it got interesting. Talk about a campaign. 2 big Fortune 500 companies attacking a small county of 30,000 people in print. The campaign got really ridiculous. They sent the CEO of DTE's electric division, and he said he had to stay in Huron County, and he basically said, just give us 1 more project and we will never do this to you again. What kind of promise is that? I mean, that's ridiculous. It's like, you know, honey, I won't hit you anymore. Let me back in the house just 1 more time. I mean, it's really kind of pathetic. And then it got menacing. A PAC associated with NextEra in their footprint said, why is this lawyer smiling? Vote no on May 2nd. Vote no to protect Sand Beach Township from costly lawsuits. They're basically saying, vote our way or we're going to sue you. They were already suing 2 townships in an adjoining county. By the way, they lost both those suits this spring. The folks fought back, and God bless them. We don't have dollars, we only have our voice, vote no. The campaign disclosures revealed that Detroit Edison NextEra spent $875,000 in PR in this county. The local folks spent $3,700 bucks. Money always wins, right? Huron County, they love turbines. They got 500 of them. The people who don't like turbines, they're just a bunch of NIMBYs. They're a small vocal minority. Well, the small vocal minority won 64 to 36% in both elections. And in fact, in Sand Beach, where they took back their zoning, the wind companies lost 85 to 15, something like that. Wind losing at the ballot box, despite lopsided campaign expenditures, is not rare in Michigan. 18 townships now have rejected permissive wind zoning regulations or have supported strong wind zoning regulations. 18 of 18 wind has lost, including in Argyle, right here. Ted talks about Invenergy a lot. That was their project. Invenergy spent $164,000 in PR in one 36 square mile township. They had people handing out Invenergy hats and t-shirts at the little crossroads, grain elevator town on the day of the election, and they still lost. More than 40 townships in 4 counties have rejected wind energy in Michigan. Despite studies that purport that the majority of folks support wind development, Michigan's wind experience shows that when these folks get the chance to vote at the township level, wind loses every time. So, let's look at a few other things we've learned. Wind developers often speak of promises of great financial benefit to landowners and township or county coffers as an inducement for permissive wind energy zoning. Remember, all their promises made to your community in the form of new taxes and landholder lease payments are recovered from Illinois ratepayers, employers, and from the U.S. Treasury. There is no free lunch. This cartoon illustrates it perfectly. The fellow's handing out the money, and the husband says, look, he's giving us all money just like he promised. And she says, he has your wallet. And that's how it works with utilities. Their money is recovered from the ratepayers. So wind companies will boast about how wind development supports farms financially. Leasing land to wind power helps keep our family farm in the black. Well, certainly true. Nobody disputes that the guys that actually get a turbine get a pretty substantial check. That's not in dispute, but let's look at some statistics. Assuming most farmers in Illinois who host wind turbines have somewhere between 2 and 4, some will have only 1, some will have 2, 3, 4. I know of one planning commissioner in Michigan who has 7. Guess which side he was on? With the turbines in operation, there may be only 800 to 1,000 Illinois farmers getting those big turbine checks. Yes, there'll be some small good neighbor checks, but it's somewhere in that range, 800 to 1,000. Great for them. How many farmers are there altogether in Illinois? 72,000 farms. So, just over 1% of all Illinois farms are getting the big checks. And since wind development raises electricity costs, it also means that the 99% of Illinois farmers not getting wind checks are actually taking a loss, especially energy-intensive dairy farmers, which we all know are struggling now as it is. So, now let's talk about setbacks. When wind was proposed in Michigan, like here, they started out at 1,000 foot and 55 decibel noise limits. The state didn't issue a guide, they didn't have any binding authority, but that's what they recommended. That's what they brought to my township in 2009. By the way, turbines were only 390 feet tall in 2008. There's been massive revolt in Michigan, and people used to laugh when I would say this. Well, obviously you're skewing the data, but this story came out. We have 2 major utility companies in Michigan, Consumers Energy and Detroit Edison. Consumers Energy submitted their integrated resource plan, and they said that we're only going to sign 2 more wind contracts in Michigan. Opposition is too strong. The thumb has blocked us out. It's our only economical wind resource region. We're going to try and get our energy from Iowa. So that's what's happened in Michigan. Now, some of you may not like nuclear power, and I want to talk to you about this just in the context of land use and energy production. Let's say you don't like nuclear power. Well, here's an 1,100 megawatt nuclear plant in Michigan. Could you replace that with wind turbines? Sort of. You could put 2 V100 turbines in every square mile from Toledo to Detroit to Ann Arbor. That's all. And then you'd still need 1,100 megawatts of gas-fired generation for July and August when the wind doesn't blow. Put it in another perspective, if your township's going to have a bunch of wind turbines, 36 square miles worth or so, you can produce the same amount of electricity on an annual basis from a semi-trailer mounted gas turbine that you can hide in your average dairy barn. They're big. They don't produce a lot of electricity, and it's intermittent, it's low quality, and it's a very expensive way of avoiding emissions. That's just a fact. Okay, now to zoning proper. How do we evaluate any product that's brought before us? We look at the total cost of ownership. What's it going to cost me? What do I get out of this thing if I bring it into my community, or I bring it out of my farm, or I buy it for my business? We need to know the price and then evaluate the benefits and costs of anything. But that's easy with a car. Cars are simple, for instance, because we all know what they're like. Even if we're Amish, we have a good idea what they are. But when somebody says they're going to build some big V100 turbines, and now they're not big, how big is 494 feet tall? Well, in Michigan, we compare it to the Mackinac Bridge, which is 552 at the tip there. Well, the Gateway Arch is 630 feet tall, and it's my understanding that developers in this area are proposing turbines even taller than that. So 660 footers are on application with the FAA right now, and I think they've been approved. Okay, so apparently Morgan County, the developer's asking to uncap the height limit. So, here's my friend Kerry Schindeldecker's former home. This is a 476-foot turbine, 1,139 feet from his house. He walked out in his backyard and snapped this picture. Like Ted, when the turbines went into operation, he and his wife moved into the basement. They stayed there for a rather long time. They sued the wind company, along with 17 or 19 families in the footprint. They ultimately sold their house at a substantial discount and moved 2 miles outside the project footprint. He sued the county, he sued the wind developer. He won a settlement with the developer, he lost against the county. He also is an engineer, highly educated man. Now, is he some fringe kook that the county dismissed? No, he's actually, after all that, was appointed to the County Planning Commission and also now sits on the Zoning Board of Appeals. And because of this experience in Mason County, Michigan, they adopted wind zoning that makes it impossible to do this to people anymore. That's the experience from these folks. It's not everybody. There are some communities that don't seem to have much objection, which is also true for landfills and prisons. I mean, there's always somebody that's willing to live with these things. But I have friends over in Ubley that one has built a concrete bunker in their garage and sleeps in their garage at night. And when I was with them, he would look at his phone and say, come over 2 nights from now because the wind's going to be out of the southeast and that's when it's the worst. So come over then and you'll experience them at their worst. His brother next door sleeps in the basement. So what can you do in Illinois? Well, your state law says a county may establish standards for wind farms and electric generating wind devices. These standards may include, without limitation, the height of the devices and the number of devices that may be located within a geographic area. Your county commissioners have total authority to regulate these things as they see fit. It gives the counties the right to regulate any land use for the purpose of promoting the public health, safety, morals, comfort, and general welfare, conserving the values of property throughout the county. So I'm going to shorten that down to health, safety, and welfare because the rest of it's too cumbersome. My opinion is if the proposed activity cannot be performed in our communities in keeping with health, safety, and welfare, it should not be permitted. I mean, developers are going to bring evidence to you that help increase their return on investment. That's their job. That's their fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders, is to make money. That's true whether they're developing housing developments or natural gas-fired power plant or wind project. But the planning official's single commitment should be to health, safety, and welfare. How far can you go with zoning? Well, they have to have your regulations have to have a rational relationship to protecting health, safety, and welfare. They must not be arbitrary or capricious. Say things like, well, people who went to Illinois University can have a 5-story house, but if you went to Notre Dame, you can only have a 2. Stuff like that would be arbitrary and capricious. But if you meet those standards, your zoning is going to be very strong in the eyes of the court. So, are developers' profits more important than your health, safety, and welfare? Are promised increases in tax revenue more important? Are claims of private property rights more important? Are claims of green jobs or emissions reductions more important than your health, safety, and welfare? The answer is no, of course not. And remember, it's the health, safety, and welfare, not health, safety, or welfare, that zoning commissioners are duty-bound to protect. Too often, they're enticed to sacrifice health and safety in exchange for some tax revenue welfare. And the wind companies promise that a lot, but those promises are not binding contracts. All right, I'm going to speed it up a little bit, but there's a lot of things we could talk about with respect to regulating wind. I'm only going to talk about height, setbacks, noise, and decommissioning. So height limits. You are free, as you saw the Illinois state law, to regulate the height of structures simply on the basis of appearance. Now, why am I saying that? The wind companies will respond to Ted's talk and say, we have all these studies that show there's no evidence of health impacts, and therefore, since you can't prove that they harm our health, you don't have a right to enact these regulations. Well, guess what? That doesn't apply to height limits. I bet you have a height limit on how tall you can build a house in your county now, and it might be 35 feet. Is that because a 40-foot tall house makes you sick? No, you just didn't want to see anything taller than 35 feet. Okay, wind turbines are no different. You can restrict their size just because you don't want to see them. People call us NIMBYs and say, well, you're just a NIMBY. You don't want, not in my backyard. Well, guess what? If you have zoning, the state has given you the right to absolutely determine what you're going to see in your backyard. That's called zoning. That's how it works. Of course we get to have a say in what happens in our backyard. So we regulate billboards all the time. They may only be 30 feet tall. Why? Because we recognize billboards have a blight on the horizon. And they're only 35 or 40 feet. And even the wind companies recognize this. Vice President of Detroit Edison says, certainly there are some pristine places in Michigan where you don't want to impact the viewshed. You take a situation like Leelanau County, the old Mission Peninsula here in our region. Certainly there are areas where it would make perfect economic sense and perfect placement for utility turbines. We probably don't want them as a region there. Notice he says in our region where he lives. The funny thing is he lives in a very wealthy stretch across the shore of Lake Michigan. And there's a lot of money there and a lot of environmentally sensitive people They zoned wind turbines out a long time ago without any fanfare or dispute. And they said, absolutely not, we don't want them. We don't want them, even though their demographic claims to strongly support protecting the planet. So, for your county, how tall is too tall? Just like any other land use, and I think I took that in Illinois about 6 years ago. So I think those are 390 footers. It's up to you. All right, now we'll jump into setbacks. What's a safe setback distance and who says? Well, the wind industry will say that we have an industry standard setback. I first got onto this in my township because there were two wind companies working at the same time, UV Wind and John Deere, which became Exelon. And it was really funny. The UV would stand up and say, we propose that you write an ordinance that has 1,000-foot setbacks and 55 decibels. John Deere would stand up and say, we want 45 decibels and 1,320 feet. So I said to their expert, are you saying UV's recommendations are unsafe? Well, yes, I am. Thought, oh, what a fine fellow. He's even willing to criticize his fellow developer. But remember the house of my friends in Mason County where they slept in their basement? That same guy also signed off on setbacks there of under 1,000 feet. So it turns out their experts are very flexible with their guidelines and their recommendations depending on what community they're working on. Remember our old rule, right? Nobody will ever tell you the truth when their paycheck depends on them not knowing the truth, right? That's how it works. So let's take a look at these so-called industry standards. Now, it's important that you understand because we're often accused of using biased sources because we have some crazy anti-wind agenda. This is from a publication in a journal called Wind Energy, published in 2016. So they just happened to put an incidental chart of various setback distances for wind turbines from around the world. So France, a mile. Germany, a mile. Rural Manitoba, 6,500 feet. Now maybe some of these have changed over time, I don't know. They point out Illinois at 1,500, and then here we go, poster child for irresponsible wind siting, Michigan, 1,000 feet. So what is the right answer? Well, the Vestas Health and Safety Manual says that if a runaway operation should occur, they're the biggest manufacturer of turbines in the world, and they just laid off 400 people because the economic climate is shifting around them. If runaway operation should occur, the plant must be evacuated immediately by running upwind, and access to the surrounding area in a radius of at least 500 meters must be restricted. That's 1,640 feet. Nordex, another substantial manufacturer of turbines, says, in case of a fire in the nacelle or on the rotor, parts may fall off the wind turbine. In case of a fire, nobody is permitted within 1,640 feet. Well, it turns out that the manufacturers have some decent idea of what can happen with a catastrophic blade failure, or as Ted calls it, a turbine that self-decommissions. This was taken in Illinois, and it's a 1,500-foot reported debris field. It's a NextEra turbine. I believe it was a 390-footer, 1,500 feet. We see evidence of this. So something you should understand if you're going to look at a revamp of your ordinance, we quoted these two Nordex and Vestas safety manuals. The wind developers now claim that the basic safety information in those manuals is proprietary and will not release them to your planning commissioners. Huron County, Michigan has a Vestas safety manual in their possession, and they will not release it under a FOIA. They say it's proprietary. What's proprietary about knowing whether the evacuation zone is 1,000 feet, 1,500, or 2,000? What exactly is, what kind of confidential trade secret is that puts you at a competitive disadvantage with your neighboring wind developer? It's clear, they don't want it to get out in the public. So, we would recommend if you're amending your ordinance to put a clause in there that says, upon application, you will submit to the board an unredacted copy of the latest safety manual for the turbines you propose to build in your community. So what about ice throw? This says skylight damage when ice flies off a wind turbine at Mount Wachusett Community College. This is this spring. How rare is that? Well, we're having issues as semi-reported ice chunks hitting his windshield somewhere. Was it down here, Illinois, Iowa? I saw it in the press. But anyways, back to this paper from the journal called Wind Energy. They did an article, an analysis of throw distance of detached objects from horizontal axis wind turbines. Those are the ones we're considering here. So they have a conclusion. It is found that while at tip speeds, which are normal operating conditions, pieces of blade with weights in the range of approximately 7 to 16 tons would be thrown out less than 2,300 feet for the entire range of wind turbines. And turbines operating at the extreme tip speed of 150 meters per second may be subject to blade throw of up to 1.2 miles from the turbine. For the ice throw cases, maximum distances of approximately 328 feet to 2,000 feet are obtained for standstill and then normal operating conditions of the wind turbine respectively, with the ice pieces weighing from 0.4 to 6.5 kilograms. And then this isn't just some theoretical thing, it says very clearly, the simulations can be useful for revision of wind turbine setback standards, especially when combined with risk assessment studies. Peer-reviewed from the journal called Wind Energy. It's not off Breitbart, it's not off, the Koch brothers' secret Let's Kill Wind website. This is from a very decidedly pro-renewable energy source. The wind developers still demand setbacks of 1,000 feet to 1,400 feet from neighboring homes, not property lines, leased or unleased for turbines in the 400 to 500 foot class. And that's what's on the books here today. Here's the rub. I call this trespass zoning. We coined this phrase along with State Senator Bill Seitz in Ohio, who chaired the Public Utility Committee at that time in the Senate. And we published this article. You go to limaohio.com, type my name, you'll find it. When you place unleased property inside the manufacturer's published evacuation zone, the wind company is basically given an easement or trespass privileges across unleased property without your consent, with no chance to negotiate for your safety, without any compensation. Now they'll tell you, we'll give you a good neighbor agreement, but the price will be determined by them and you'll have no negotiating power because they don't need you to sign the good neighbor agreement if the setbacks are measured to your house. And it's funny, Ted talked about $1,000 a year good neighbor agreement from Invenergy in Illinois. In Michigan, they only offered $500 a year. I call this trespass zoning. Your current ordinance permits the neighboring landowner's tenant, the wind company, to trespass upon your property with a safety easement and a nuisance noise easement. Now, wind developers object to that phrase, but here's a statement from a NextEra wind lease that if you actually signed it, you're signing and giving them an effects easement. It says the owner grants to the operator a non-exclusive easement for audio, visual, view, light, flicker, noise, shadow, vibration, etc., and any other effects attributed to the wind farm or actively located on the owner's property or adjacent properties. Apparently, in the mind of a wind developer, it's only an easement when they purchase the rights to do these things to your home, but when they can talk the zoning board into donating the right to do these things to your home, or the ordinance is silent on home setbacks like I've seen in a few communities, it's not an easement. Well, of course it's an easement. And this is what it looks like. Now here, the numbers are already too strong because I'm showing a developer's recommendation of 1320 to a house. Now this isn't to scale. I'll show you a scale one in a minute. Here it's only 1,000. I'm sure Apex will say, well, we're going to honor 1,200 or 1,300, maybe, I don't know. But bottom line is, typical in Michigan, we see 1,320, even though the evacuation zone is 1,640. Well, what if we move it to 1,640, like Huron County, Michigan did? Huron County, 500 turbines started at 1,000 feet, then moved it to 1,320. Now they're at 1,640. They've dropped their noise level from 50 to 45 and look like they're going to reduce the noise levels, increase the setbacks even more because the people won't take any more of them. But let's say we move the evacuation zone to 1,640 to your house. Well, here's the problem. Half this farmer's property, or a big chunk of it, is still in that evacuation zone. Are you going to let him build a house there for his daughter who's going to take over the farming operation? Are you going to put your swing set back here? And secondly, remember it says they're supposed to run upwind away from the turbine during certain types of failures. I've never seen whether or not the wind company has told their employees to knock on your door on the way by as the thing caught fire, but it seems you might want to put that in your ordinance. You at least give a courtesy knock to say, hey, it's on fire. At bare minimum, the evacuation zone for 500-foot turbines should be at your property line. If they want to use your yard for a safety easement, they should write you a check and you should negotiate the terms. By doing this, the no contract farmer can use his or her farm as they wish. This is Exelon's map for Bridgehampton Township. The green parcels are leased, the gray are unleased. I'll zoom in on this guy's house. Now, curiously, these farms here are leased, but the house lots are not. This guy doesn't live on the farm, but he's leased it. Here's unleased property here. This guy lives on his farm. And then there's more leased property here. And if you zoom in again, you'll see this farm in the middle. Fully, 50% of his farm is inside that evacuation zone with no consent, no compensation. I think that's just fundamentally unjust. Before the turbines are built, you're at no risk of ice throw, shadow flicker, noise, or being woken up in the middle of the night. That's the bottom line. Right now, you don't have any of these risks. And our friends from Morgan County have drawn up a couple of these examples here. showing the failure zone and the distances to the house, and in fact, the express goal of zoning regulations, and anybody who's in zoning understands this, is to separate conflicting land uses from each other. By establishing setbacks from neighboring homes rather than property lines, the conflicting use is actually granted legal access to the neighboring property without consent or compensation. This is fundamentally unjust. The way to fix that is big setbacks to unleased property lines, small setbacks to leased homes, and let the developer negotiate an easement. Then it's not the county commissioner's fault anymore. It's up to the developers to get out their check and make it work. Why should you subsidize them with a free easement? You're already subsidizing them with production tax credit and preferential access to the ratepayer's wallet through the renewable portfolio standard enacted in Illinois law. Isn't that enough? I'm not going to go into that. So what is the right setback distance? I would say if all you want to do is protect your neighboring property owner from fire or rotor failure, 1640 or a multiple of turbine height equal to 1640. And I like multiple of turbine heights instead of a fixed number because, as you already seen, when your ordinance was written, they were 390 feet tall or maybe 350. Now they're 660. If you make it a multiplier, your ordinance will never become obsolete. As the turbine gets taller, your setback distance gets taller, and it's self-regulating. Secondly, it's very hard for them to sue you for an claim of exclusionary zoning because your defense in court with a multiple of turbine height approach is, well, wait a minute, at 4x the height from a property line, you can build maybe 5,000 50-foot tall turbines. See what I'm saying? You have a ready defense by saying you don't have a right to build whatever height you want wherever you want. So I like multiples. And in view of the recent peer-reviewed research on blade and ice throw, far bigger property line setbacks are probably in order. And we're seeing this in Europe. We're seeing it all over. We're seeing it in Illinois. There's a number of communities that are adjusting their ordinances to bigger and bigger setbacks over time. And I'm going to skip that one. All right. How loud is too loud, and who do you believe? This is very contentious. Well, there's just 14 turbines in the Garden Peninsula in Michigan, and 73 people signed petitions there saying, stop the noise. Do you know who owns the development in the Garden Peninsula? Not Apex. How many of you watched the Curse of Oak Island reality TV show? Has anybody ever seen that? Where that poor guy's digging up that island? Well, that's Marty Legina. He owns Heritage Sustainable. He's the one that's built the turbines up there. What's curious about it is the Fish and Wildlife Service told him not to build on the Garden Peninsula in the middle of Lake Michigan because it poses an inordinate risk to migratory waterfowl and birds. And he built anyways because Fish and Wildlife has no enforcement authority. Not only that, they're in a bitter battle now trying to build a phase 2 even farther down on the peninsula. Bottom line is those 14 turbines are very problematic for the people that live there. There's been litigation, it's ongoing, and they're preemptively suing to try and prevent phase 2. Now, as we've already seen, the wind companies and others will tell you, look, 50 to 40 decibels, that's no big deal. Problem is, at night in your community, you're going to hear 20 or 25 decibels. Some quiet communities might be down as low as 18. You'll say, well, the wind will be blowing, but as Ted already said, there are times of wind shear in which you'll be in a very calm wind speed at the ground, yet the winds aloft will be adequate to be turning the turbines at a pretty high speed to produce a fair amount of sound. Secondly, wind noise in your ears doesn't work when you're on your patio and you're protected by a wall somewhere. So these things sound nice and glib until you live with the reality a little bit. So basically, they're asking to raise your nighttime noise threshold from 25 to 50 or 55 with no regulatory harm to their business interests. Your ordinance says that these things will be determined by the Pollution Control Board regulations. And as we already heard, Dr. Schomer said, who helped write those, wind farms were never contemplated in those standards. How could they have been? It was 1968. Schomer says, I don't feel the standards are adequate for protecting neighbors from the purpose of wind development. Schomer said the general consensus among his colleagues should be set around 40 decibels. Schomer said he recommended increasing that setback, by the way, from 1,500 feet there to 3,300. Yours is 1,000. How about the World Health Organization? So wind companies say there's no evidence that wind turbine noise has direct impacts on health. Well, I'm not a guy that spends a lot of time talking about it, but nonetheless, that's just not a true statement. They did a study in 2009 that said, look, up to 30 decibels, no substantial effects to anybody from noise of any kind. This is a long-term nighttime average. Long-term nighttime average between 30 and 40, body movements, awakening, sleep disturbance, arousal, may be a modest effect. Chronically ill and elderly populations are affected to a greater degree. So first of all, let us understand what a health effect is. They're reporting that body movements, awakening, sleep disturbance, arousal are a health effect from noise. Well, no, nobody goes into the hospital and says I have wind turbine syndrome and I want that diagnosis, but how many of you are having these kinds of effects, and are you being monitored for them? Now, it gets harder. From 40 to 55 decibels, we see a sharp increase in adverse health effects. World Health Organization, well, you have a 55 decibel noise limit. And I will tell you, your 55 decibel noise limit, oh no, I'm sorry, you don't. You have the Pollution Control Board standards here. Forgive me, that's my mistake. One too many wind talks this month. It's 48 decibels. The problem is, as an average, you're going to have times where it's 55, and at 1,000 feet, you're going to have 60. If they actually built one at 1,000 feet, you're going to have 60 or 65 decibels. And here's the problem that comes with that. Mason County, Michigan learned this. If you don't have money in your ordinance now that requires the wind companies to place money in escrow to help you enforce your ordinance regulations in the future, you will never have enough money in this county to be able to afford to challenge them if you find them to be out of compliance. You don't have enough money in this county to play that game. You will spend years paying really expensive acousticians and battling this thing for a long time in court with six-figure legal bills mounting in a hurry. That's the downside. So your ordinance should require some escrowed money to be available in the event that you have enforcement actions that they're going to pay your costs of enforcing. So above 55, adverse health effects occur frequently. Adverse health effects. World Health Organization says obviously noise can cause health effects. And a new paper says a similar thing from 2018. Through using an alternative wind exposure measurement, this analysis demonstrated that living in close proximity to wind turbines is associated with lower environmental and physical quality of life measures that also strengthen the notion that wind turbines are associated with annoyance. Dave Hessler does a lot of work for the wind industry. He says 40 decibels. NextEra, this is my favorite one. NextEra asked for 55 decibel noise limits in Michigan. But in Ontario, they boast about the fact, of course, they just sold their wind developments off completely in Ontario because the subsidies got shut off. They boasted about the fact that they complied with a 40 decibel noise limit in Ontario, and not just that they complied with it, but that 40 decibels is consistent with the standards set by the US EPA. So in Canada, they say we like 40 because it's consistent with the US EPA, yet in Michigan, which I think is the United States, they asked for 55. So, based upon sound science from renewable energy friendly sources, I recommend a 40 decibel nighttime noise limit at non-participating property lines, and I've already explained how you can do the two-stage thing. Decommissioning matters. Now these are finally gone, but these sat in Hawaii for a very long time. Wind companies will sometimes tell you the cost of the value of the scrap metal will pay for the decommissioning costs. Well, then why did they sit there for 10 years? I won't go into this, but Detroit Edison, under oath, testified to the Michigan Public Service Commission that they just basically don't know how long the service lives of these turbines are going to be. They expect nearly all the towers in the Gratiot Wind Park to be in service for 20 years. The tower's average service life to be 25. Service life of the rotor blades to be 20. If you watch the news, you'll see they're dropping them far before that. And the gearboxes are only expected to last 10 years according to Detroit Edison. And it's generator 20. I think your ordinance needs to have language similar to this. The applicant will furnish to the township a decommissioning bond equal to the value of the cost of removal for the turbines at the end of their useful life. The value of this bond will be determined by an independent third-party engineer, and this is important, selected by the township or county and paid for by the applicant. This valuation shall be updated every 5 years at the applicant's expense and the value of the bond adjusted accordingly. It's the fairest way I can think of to make sure you have some protection, but even bonds aren't a guarantee. Now, property values, I'll be brief, but it's important to note that the wind companies, if they haven't handed you this report from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, they should turn in their wind developers decoder ring, because they hand it out everywhere and have since 2008. And it's basically concludes there's no statistically significant evidence of loss of property values associated with proximity to wind turbines for your homes. Here's the part they leave out. The author of that study said, in a phone interview, you can hear it online, I think one of the things that often happens is that wind developers put our report forward and say, look, property values aren't affected. And that's not what we would say specifically. On the other hand, they have little ground to stand on if they say we won't guarantee that. I recommend a property value guarantee. If they say there's no evidence of loss of property values, there's no financial risk to them in offering to protect that risk. It only stands to reason. Now, there are 3 studies that have deep ties to the wind industry that suggest no statistically significant loss of property values associated with proximity to wind turbines. But there are 11 studies that show there are substantial harm to property values, including one from the London School of Economics, which I think has no ties to the fossil fuel industry in the United States, that shows an 11% loss of property values. It only stands to reason that if you got a choice between a house with a 500-foot or 600-foot turbine 1,000 feet away versus one without it, most people are going to prefer the one without it. What more do you need to know? It obviously cuts your market in half. But here's, and this is my last section, here's why I pointed out the fact that that study was from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. The wind companies claim that LBL is the gold standard for reports that are reliable for communities to depend upon for the evaluation of potential impacts of wind turbines in your community. So, in January of this year, they did a national survey of attitudes of wind power project neighbors and summarized the results. 4-year project, collecting data from a broad base and representative sample of individuals living near U.S. wind power. So, what did they find? Well, the data appears sound from my perspective, but the impacts are severely diluted because they measure, their pool of measurement goes out to 5 miles away from wind turbines. Well, I don't even claim there's any impacts from living 5 miles away from wind turbines, but you obviously really dilute the pool. Fortunately, they broke it down into various subsets of how close you are to the turbines for a number of issues. So, wind companies will push this part out and say, well, look, 92% of the people have no objections or are neutral on wind development, only 8% have a negative or very negative view. But that's out to 5 miles away. When you get in close and look down at the bottom chart, within a half mile, 25%. Now I think the attitude is as long as it's 50% or less, then it's okay. Well, that strikes me as a little odd. Nobody in your county is having any deleterious effects from wind turbine development, and I can't believe that anybody would say a land use policy that annoys 1 out of 4 people in your county is a good land use policy. Is that our standard? 1 out of 4 is good enough as long as it's not 2 out of 4? I don't think so. And virtually everyone within the project footprint is going to be within a half mile of a turbine. Finally, we know that study did not include any 660-foot turbines. Have you ever heard the sound from the wind power project? I hear officials say this. I drove out to Vermilion, I sat under them, stood right under them, they don't make any noise. Well, guess what? 81% of the people within a half mile said yes, they make noise. And you can always prove that by simply saying to your developer, is it your testimony here tonight that wind turbines are silent? And they will say, no, they are not silent. So, nearby turbine neighbors can hear turbines inside their homes with windows open and closed. So if you stood under one and didn't hear anything, it was not under full power. So they kind of screwed with the statistics a little bit here. But basically, 81% of the people who live within a half mile who reported to be able to hear the turbines, because 19% said they couldn't hear them within a half mile, but of the 81% who could, 57% report annoyance, and 31% are moderately to very annoyed by noise that they want you to understand or at least conclude isn't real. Again, this is Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. This is 2018. This is the gold standard of studies on these kinds of issues from the perspective of the wind developers. Again, nobody in Morgan County is being annoyed by wind turbine sounds today. Now, what about the impact to the landscape? A large percentage of people who do not like, do not like the visual impacts of wind turbines. 42% don't like them within a half mile, but even in the 5 mile range, you see it's not a trivial number. There's a lot of folks. Of course, these people are these people, but diluted. No one is being annoyed by wind turbine visual impacts here today. So, LBL study has validated everything I've been saying for years. 1, wind turbine noise is loud enough to be heard inside your homes. That's not a myth. 2, a large percentage of people living within a mile of turbines are annoyed by both the sight and sound of turbines, and even at a great distance, wind turbines are a visual stigma to many turbine neighbors. So, where am I at? By coupling the ice and blade throw data from the Wind Industry Journal with the LBL report, we see that the industry is finally having to face the simple fact that we have been maintaining for years. Utility scale wind development adversely affects A large number of people, when placed too closely to homes, the question is no longer 1,000 feet or 1320. It's clearly now a question of a half mile or a mile and a quarter. So most land use changes are pretty benign. I mean, we could all argue about how big should signs be allowed in front of your church. And some will say 25 feet and some 28, but the truth is, it's not a very dramatic discussion, right? Wind turbines are so large and have such a massive impact on your landscape, we felt in my township that the only way that this pervasive of a change that affects this many people should ever take place is if the people who live closest to it had a chance to negotiate an easement across their property, that the township officials or county officials should not donate their property to the neighboring landowner's tenants. And the two-stage waivers are the key. Remember, nobody's come to your county commission and said, the light coming through my windows is too steady, could you make it flicker? They never came in and said the nighttime noise level is too quiet, could you raise it to 55 from 25? They've never said my property values are too stable, could you build some 50-story industrial machines next door to put that value at risk? Nobody's ever asked for that. The bottom line of zoning is we were here first, we get to decide. What's next? The Morgan County Wind Ordinance is now 10 years old and it's sharply out of step with the latest science. We see that in Michigan very clearly. In Indiana, county after county after county is looking at the experience of other counties and just saying, no, we've had enough. We're not going to do this anymore. I think in your community it'd be wise to enact a 1-year moratorium because it's a little different here in Illinois. Once Apex applies, they have a vested interest in your current zoning. In Michigan, they don't have a vested right in your zoning ordinance until they have a building permit and they've started digging. But in Illinois, once they apply, they have a vested interest in your zoning ordinance. The only way to give yourself latitude to make changes is to adopt a moratorium, to preserve your right to look at this and evaluate. This would give you time to take citizen input, stakeholder input, and this is very common in Illinois because of the laws on vested rights. So in the end, my recommendations are based upon the Riga Township Wind Ordinance, and you can find that at rigatownship.com. Thank you for your patience. Oh, you want to take questions? Ted, maybe you want to come up and join me?
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
I'd like to know how many of the county commissioners are planning on having wind turbines within 1,600 feet of the property.
Well, it's my understanding the commissioners aren't going to take any questions tonight.
No, I'm not asking them.
Right.
Surely somebody knows.
I don't know if anybody knows here, but let me say this clearly, because people often say to me, what should I do with our elected policymakers to express my concerns to them? Let me be clear, because I've been a planning commissioner. Showing up in large groups is important, but you need to be civil. But most effective, take a page out of the wind developer's playbook, call your elected officials and say, I'm willing to offer you coffee or a beer in exchange for just a half hour for me and my wife or me and my husband to talk to you about our concerns over coffee or beer somewhere, where you can have a free exchange of ideas and let them understand your concerns are real and talk to you person to person. Remember, your county commissioners have total governmental authority over your land use future. And if you're hoping to entice them to make some positive changes in the direction you'd like to see them, they need to like you. That's the bottom line. And if you make them angry, then they may be inclined to say, screw this, I'm not going to put up with this. But I will tell you that it's common for policymakers not to live near turbines.
Good one. I like to disagree with Kevin. If you approach that county commissioner or county board member and they're not receptive to you and they think that your questions are unfair and you're just putting them on the spot and they start putting it back on you, it's your fault, that's time that's to remove that commissioner. You need to get your friends and relatives and neighbors and put other people forward and replace them. I fought through that, and I'm going to say more than half of the time that has been the thing that we've had to do to protect citizens, because the commissioner had already been convinced that the wind turbines are a good idea. And in my experience, you have to work 10 times harder to get someone to change their mind. Once they've made up their mind, you're behind the 8 ball. You're too late, possibly. So I recommend that you replace them if they're not receptive.
I love my friend Ted. I'm still gonna distance myself from that comment. To say, you need to be kind and polite and talk to them privately so that you don't have to have the public rancor over this thing. Because I tell you what, one of the main purposes of land use regulations is to preserve the social construct, the social relationships we have in our communities, be it at church, be it at work, be it at school. And I would like to see a community deal with this in a way that preserves those social structures. Unfortunately, what I've seen all across the Midwest is once a wind project is proposed, even if it never gets built, I got neighbors now who still honk their horns at 3 o'clock in the morning when they drive by our house, and it's been 7 years in my township. That's not rural Midwest values, and I hope you can find a way to protect those here.
I want to add just a little bit here, if you don't mind. I've attended several of the county commissioners' meetings, along with some of my other cohorts, and I want to say that it's very open, and they're very receptive, and they are listening. So I think we couldn't ask for any more right now. They're looking at the issue. You can go in there anytime in the morning. They're usually there, and you can sit down and you can talk to them. And that's what I would suggest you do. But I'm very satisfied with our county commissioners as far as being open and the dialogue with them. I just wanted to give them some credit for that anyway. We bump heads once in a while, but we're okay.
I know it's very late, and I know some of you are gonna wait for us to say it's okay for you to go. So why don't we just take like 3 more questions, and then Ted and I will sit up here and talk as long as you want. Yes, sir.
Do you have a website or someplace where if I want to have a trucker family come here, we have to say, you post where you're speaking next or anything, or?
Oh, well,
We won't be back.
yeah, I mean,
Unless there's ZBA hearings.
right, if there's hearings or something, we might be in the area, but I'm not scheduled to speak anywhere in Illinois in the immediate future. I mean, we're gonna be at a hearing tomorrow night in Ford County, but I don't know, either of us not doing any presentations or anything there. But if you wanna see my full zoning talks, you can go to YouTube and just type Kevon Martis. You'll see one of me playing my electric guitar, you'll see one of me singing like an idiot, and then you'll see a whole bunch of long, boring talks about wind energy zoning. And if you type my name in Koch brothers, you'll find a bunch of lies written about me by the progressive left.
This will be on there as well.
Yeah, and this talk will be on there, it's being recorded now. Other questions, couple more? Yes, sir.
Has any county ever been successful in saying they can't turn at night early?
Well,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I know that turbines have been compelled to run in reduced noise operation mode in Mason County. But you know what, like any other activity, you could write a zoning ordinance that says you can build all the turbines you want, but we're not gonna permit them operate between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. because that's when our folks sleep. You can do that with a racetrack. I mean, in Michigan, there's a Pine Knob concert venue that at 11 p.m. the music goes off, or the rock concert artist pays like $1,000 a minute fine for playing beyond 11 p.m. and there's a huge clock on the side of the stage. I saw Journey and the Doobie Brothers there, and at 11 o'clock it goes quiet right now. You absolutely have those rights to regulate activity like that in your community. Any other questions?
As far as getting them to be forced to be turned off, in Falmouth, Massachusetts, a court order has caused them to be shut down, and
They're going to be removed.
those are going to be torn down. There was another place that they required them to be shut down at nighttime, and I can't, off the top of my head, remember where that was at.
Any other questions? Anything? Well, I want to thank Mike and all the local folks here. You know, it's important that you guys stay in communication with each other and you find a civil way to advance your agenda with your county officials. And I just pray, because I am a believer, I pray that the tranquility of this community is preserved as you go through this contentious process. So I wish you the best.